Hello. This is the final lecture for chapter 16, and this covers other endocrine organs. So this is going to be other tissues, organs that have that secrete hormones that are important to know. So the first thing we talk about is the pancreas. And the pancreas is a triangular gland located partially behind the stomach. And the kind of cool thing about the pancreas is that it has both exocrine and endocrine cells. So the acinar cells are exocrine, and they're going to produce this stuff for digestion, this enzyme-rich juice for digestion. And then there's the pancreatic islets, the islets of Langerhans, and these contain endocrine cells. We have the alpha cells, which produce glucagon, and this is considered a hyperglycemic hormone. And then beta cells, which produce insulin, which makes it a hypoglycemic hormone. And just to explain the hyper and hypo, so remember, hyper means above, more, right? And glycemic often is referring to like glucose levels. So hyper means an increase in glucose. So glucagon is going to cause an increase in glucose in the blood, and insulin is hypoglycemic, and hypo means below. So this is going to be something that's going to make it to where there's going to be less glucose in the blood. So this is a photomicrograph of pancreatic tissue. We have the alpha cells here and here and here. And these again are going to be making glucagon. And then we have the beta cells here, here, and here, and these are going to be producing insulin. And then on the outside here, we're going to have the pancreatic acinar cells, which are exocrine, which are going to make that digestive juice. All right, so glucagon, extremely potent hyperglycemic agent. It's going to be triggered by low levels of glucose in the blood, and that makes sense, right? You have low levels of glucose in the blood, and glucagon's job is to increase blood glucose levels. It's also going to be triggered by rising amino acid levels or sympathetic nervous system. It's going to raise blood glucose levels by targeting the liver to do the following. First, remember, we store our glucose, excuse me, we store our excess glucose as glycogen. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to direct glycogen to be broken down into glucose, and this is called glycogenolysis. The next thing it's going to do is synthesize glucose from lactic acid and other non-carbohydrates, gluconeogenesis. Remember, gluconeogenesis means making new glucose. And it's going to release glucose into the blood. Insulin, which is its antagonist, right? So glucagon is on one side, insulin's on the other, and they're both doing the opposite thing. So they're antagonists. Insulin is going to be secreted when blood glucose levels increase. It's first secreted or synthesized as proinsulin, and then it's modified after that. And insulin is going to lower blood glucose levels in 3 ways. First, it's going to enhance membrane transport of glucose into fat and muscles. Next, it's going to stop glycogen from breaking down into glucose, right? Remember, that's what glucagon's doing, is trying to make glycogen break down to glucose. So insulin is coming in there, and it's going to put a stop to that. And then it's also going to inhibit the conversion of amino acids or fats to glucose. I'm hoping you're seeing more where the antagonist part is, right? So glucagon is actually trying to make glucose from amino acids and fats, and insulin is inhibiting that. All right, insulin is not needed for glucose uptake in the liver, kidney, or brain. It plays a role in neuronal development, learning, and memory. And what happens is it binds to tyrosine kinase enzyme receptors, and that's going to trigger the cell to increase glucose uptake. It can also trigger cells to do a number of other things, including actually causing the formation of glycogen. So it's going to polymerize glucose to form glycogen, catalyze oxidation of glucose for ATP production, which is actually the first priority, which I should have said first. Sorry about that. And it's also going to cause glucose to be converted to fat, particularly in adipose tissue, which is the fats. Adipose tissue is fat tissue. A number of factors influence insulin release. The primary stimulus is going to be an elevation of blood glucose levels, but a rising level of amino acids and fatty acids will also trigger it. The release of acetylcholine by parasympathetic fibers, nerve fibers, and then a number of hormones can also influence insulin release. And some of these are going to inhibit and some of these are going to actually cause. So we have glucagon, which is going to inhibit, epinephrine, then growth hormone, thyroxine, glucocorticoids. Somatostatin and sympathetic nervous system inhibit insulin release. And then this is just kind of showing the kind of balancing act that goes on with glucose levels in our body. So if we start off here and we have a decrease in blood glucose levels, the pancreas is going to secrete glucagon, which is going to cause a breakdown of glycogen, which is going to convert that to glucose, and then blood glucose levels are going to rise. Then if they get too high, the pancreas is going to secrete insulin, and insulin is going to cause glucose to be taken up by the tissues, but also to be converted to glycogen, which is going to lower blood glucose levels. The gonads and placenta. So gonads produce same-sex steroid hormones as those of the adrenal cortex, just lesser amounts. The ovaries produce estrogens and progesterone, and estrogen does a couple of things on its own, and then with progesterone does something else. So, and these are kind of the big things. And we're going to talk more about estrogen and progesterone when we get all the way back to like the very end of the semester. But estrogen plays a role in maturation of reproductive organs, appearance of secondary sexual characteristics, and then with progesterone will cause breast development and cyclic changes in the uterine mucosa. The testes produce testosterone. This will initiate maturation of male reproductive organs and also lead to the appearance, the development of male secondary sex characteristics and sex drive. This is necessary for normal sperm production, and it also maintains reproductive organs in a functional state. And then the final thing we had was the placenta, and this is going to secrete estrogen, progesterone, and then what's known as the pregnancy hormone, which is human chorionic gonadotropin. And that's all we're going to talk about with this for now. We'll talk about this later on when we get to pregnancy. Adipose tissue, we have adipose cells can release three different hormones, three major hormones: leptin, resistin, and adiponectin. Leptin is going to play a role in controlling appetite, and it's going to stimulate increased energy expenditure. Resistin is an insulin antagonist, and adiponectin is going to enhance sensitivity to insulin. We have the GI tract. Enteroendocrine cells secrete these hormones, and we'll talk more about these hormones when we get to the digestive system chapter. But just as a little brief kind of overview, we have gastrin, which will stimulate the release of hydrochloric acid. Ghrelin, which we've mentioned a couple of times before already. This is the hunger hormone. So it says from the stomach, and it's going to stimulate food intake, which just means it's going to make you hungry. Secretion, which is going to stimulate liver and pancreas. Cholecystokinin is going to activate the pancreas, gallbladder, and pancreatic sphincter, and then incretins are going to enhance insulin release and inhibit glucagon. So this is, again, we'll talk about some of these in more detail when we get to the digestive system chapter. But it's good to have kind of a little, like some background knowledge on it now. The heart, we've talked about this already, but the heart produces atrial natriuretic peptide. And what this is going to do is decrease blood sodium level concentrations, decrease blood sodium concentration, which will in turn decrease blood pressure, and blood volume. And then the kidneys, we have erythropoietin is going to cause the production of red blood cells. And then renin, which we've again talked about already, and this plays a role in the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism. In the skeleton, the osteoblast in the bones secrete osteocalcin. And remember, the osteoblasts are the cells that lay down bone matrix in the bone. And this is going to prod the pancreas to secrete more insulin, restrict fat storage, improve glucose handling, reduce body fat. It's going to be activated by insulin. And the interesting thing is that in people that have type 2 diabetes, they have low levels of this hormone. And so the thought is that possibly increasing levels of this hormone could be a treatment. With the skin, we have cholecalciferol, which is a precursor to vitamin D, and then we have vitamin D itself, calciferol. And remember, vitamin D is going to help absorb calcium from the intestine, and it's also going to modulate immunity, decrease inflammation, and can act as an anti-cancer agent. The thymus, this is an organ that in infants and in children is large, and it actually gets smaller as we get older. And there are these three things listed here, which are classified as hormones, but they actually act as paracrines. And they are thymulin, thymopoietins, and thymosins. And they may be involved in normal development of T lymphocytes in the immune response. And we'll talk more about the immune response for sure. We may talk a little bit more about these hormones as we get to the immunity chapter. And then we're done talking about hormones. I mean, actual specific hormones. The next couple of slides, which there's only 3 slides left, plus the question slides, we're going to be focusing on developmental aspects of the endocrine system, including the environmental effects of, or the effects of environmental pollutants. So, believe it or not, exposure to pesticides, industrial chemicals, arsenic, dioxin, and soil and water pollutants can disrupt hormone function. The hormones that are most vulnerable to the effects of pollutants are sex hormones, thyroid hormones, and glucocorticoids. There's actually some towns where they have showed like higher rates of infertility and other issues related to this, as well as certain areas that have higher rates of cancer. And the thought behind this is that environmental pollutants interfere with glucocorticoids, which could explain the higher cancer rates. The endocrine system functions throughout life. Most of our endocrine organs operate well until old age. Some do decline. Growth hormone declines with age. This is going to account for muscle atrophy with age. Thyroid hormone declines with age, which is going to contribute to a lower basal metabolic rate. Now, the one that's kind of unfortunate is parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone remains fairly constant with age, but because older women lack estrogen, they are more vulnerable to the bone demineralizing effects of parathyroid hormone. Remember when we talked about the skeleton back in AMP1, we talked about how estrogen and testosterone have like protective effects against the bone being broken down. And so whenever women get older, their estrogen levels drop, which is going to make them more vulnerable to this issue. Glucose tolerance deteriorates with age, and then ovaries undergo significant change with age and become unresponsive to gonadotropins. And then finally, testosterone also diminishes with age, but the effect is usually not seen until very old age. Oh, and that was the last slide, by the way. These are your questions. And this is all I have for you. I hope everybody has an absolutely great day.